Sego, Sewo Gwego, Gotehenis Young Yaps. My name is Crystal Doolittle, and I come to you from Six Nations of the Grand River Territory here in Ontario. I am Mohawk, and I also come from the Wolf Clan. I am a mother, first and foremost. I am a grandmother, a sister, an auntie, and a daughter. In my professional role here at the Association of Native Child and Family Service Agencies of Ontario, I'm the Director of Family Wellbeing. And in this role, I oversee policy and research, training, development, and delivery. And I also oversee the prevention portfolio, which looks at an array of processes and ideas and supports for our Indigenous member agencies. I'd like to pass it on over to Gertie Beaucage, who will give an introduction to herself.
Bueno, bonjour, Kanawaya. Greetings to all of you. My name is Jean Obadeshikwe. I'm a member of the Bear Clan. I'm Ojibwe Anishinaabe. I originate from Nipissing First Nations, and I have lived and worked in Ontario for the most part of my life with children, families, and organizations providing services to people who are experiencing challenges in achieving a quality of life that would result in good outcomes for their children and their grandchildren. I'm a mother and a grandmother, and currently I serve as a traditional knowledge keeper and provide services to people who are experiencing the long-term impacts of trauma, particularly as a result of having a family history of residential schools and other institutions that have resulted in challenging conditions in their lives. For the most part, the work that I do is based on a recognition of having a common experience of trauma, and that we are the people who have experienced the trauma, and therefore we are also the people who know how to help each other heal. And in the words of one of my teachers, you cannot turn to the one who caused you harm to ask for healing. And on that premise, we offer services to our relatives and and all of those people who are known as Indigenous people in our country, in our territories, and are able to relate to the pain and sometimes the untenable positions they find themselves in. So I think for myself, that work is far more satisfying than some of the options that were promoted to me as a young person, and certainly have worked very hard over my lifetime to earn that responsibility. So that's me in a way too many words. I hope everybody enjoys our presentation and achieves some sense of how to go about working with Indigenous children, youth, and families.
Yeah, Gertie. Thank you for that. Great introduction on yourself, and definitely I could sit here and listen for a long, long time on things that you have to share. Before we get into our presentation to you all today, we just wanted to take a few moments to acknowledge some of the work behind our presentation. We had met Dr. John Lyons several years back when Gertie was the executive director at an organization called the Barrie Area Native Advisory Circle. And with that, we also had one of our champions behind the scenes, Brenda Jackson, who was instrumental in mobilizing us together, creating opportunities for us to meet, to hear what Dr. Lyons had to say, as well as to ask questions about the CAN's processes. With that, we took that information and we thought that this was really important work that was done, and there might be opportunities for us to insert some cultural relevance for us to make that tool more applicable. Unfortunately, Brenda Jackson is no longer with us. She just recently passed a few weeks ago, but we wanted to make sure that we acknowledged some of her hard work behind the scenes. Today, we're going to also share with you some of the ways that we work with our Indigenous children, youth, and our families. And some of it may be through stories, and just some of it may be through examples. But we hope that you get what you need to out of the presentation. And if you at all you have any questions, or you wanted to get in contact with either Gertie or myself, or even our organization, I do have the contact information that is left on the very last slide for you to draw yourself to. So the journey of ANCFSAO and programs like BANAC to support the sector. First, I'm going to pass it over to my friend Gertie to talk to you a little bit about some pre-contact information and what's important to set the tone for understanding who we are and where we come from.
One of the, I suppose, one of the most important aspects of traditional knowledge has been identifying and learning about the creation story of our nation. And the Ojibwe Nation has a creation story. So too do the Mohawks, the Lakotas, the Cherokees, the Navajos. Everyone has a creation story. And that creation story is both a history and a guide to understanding the foundational values of the nation. And in those stories, people are able to see what is important to teach our children. And in that passing on of that story, the child begins to recognize their relationship to the creation and to recognizing their responsibilities within that relationship as well. When that creation story is available to the child knows who they are and who their ancestors are and what their rights and responsibilities are within their own nation, within their family, and what it is that they're intended to be doing. So it's not just myths and legends that are being passed along to the child. The child is receiving their family's understanding of who they are within the nation that they live, that they come from. And in doing so, the child knows who all of their relationships are intended to be with. And for that child to have that provides them with the foundations for every other aspect of their life, who they can turn to, who they can call on, and who has a responsibility to them. And when their parents fall on hard times or are not able to carry out their responsibilities, somebody within their clan or community or their nation needs to be able to be seen as taking up that responsibility until the parents can take it up for themselves again. So this is nothing new. There's nothing new about challenges to family and the capacity of parents to provide all of the care that their children need. There's nothing new about that. We lived in a hunting and gathering society amongst our nation, across the continent, various lifestyles developed based on the environment people lived in. And it was not necessarily the safest or the easiest way to live. And so just as with any other society, there were provisions made to take care of responsibilities that couldn't be managed by parents anymore or by the family members. Sometimes accidents and hardship can overtake families. And so there were provisions made. Who could take care of? And how did that happen? Well, we had, amongst the Ojibwe people, we had all kinds of different relationships upon which a child could call to be alternatives to their parents. All of that was in place through our clan systems and governance systems. And because of that, it was always a recognition, there was always a recognition that children are in fact the seeds of our future. So it was a good idea for the nation to make provisions for caring for children at all times. This approach to nurturing our future was maintained over centuries and millennia, and was disturbed by contact. And so in the past few hundred years, there's been a great disturbance. There has been a lot of, I would say, challenges to our way of doing things, and dismissal of our way of doing things on the basis of a proposal that is known as the Doctrine of Discovery, and the government policies that ensued in the rather rapid establishment of nations such as Canada and the United States. And I think the relationship of Indigenous people was only useful until the treaties were actually signed and the land was surrendered to various governments through those treaties. And certainly the end result was a dismissal of that relationship, and a complete, there are discussions about how some of the treaties, the ink hadn't even dried before the treaties were broken. So, there is a lot of, I believe, shame-based feelings in the relationship between Indigenous people and various forms of government, which I would say is probably would not be a surprise to me. And so there's a resistance as well to collaboration with Indigenous communities, because it has been for several centuries a viewpoint that suggests we didn't know how to do these things. We didn't know how to take care of our own, because acknowledging that we had distinct ways of doing things that might have seemed a bit different from what was in place in Europe. Had they acknowledged that our ways of doing things were just were of the same value, it would have suggested that the Doctrine of Discovery had it wrong. So we're still trying to get rid of that Doctrine of Discovery. So if anybody finds it, please just rip it up and we'll carry on without it. But I'm trying to tease about it, but it is in fact the foundations of a very long and contentious relationship with the new people who came to North America. And in some ways, it continues to affect and impact on the relationships that we're trying to ensure lose their hold on our communities. And this is this process of trying to provide support and help to Indigenous children, youth, and their families is one of the aspects of that changing relationship that needs to be there in order for those relationships to become effective. In my first, I suppose, in my first job many years ago, one of the questions I was asked by a social worker was how can I be effective when I don't even know how to find these children or their families? And the simple answer is establish a relationship. And it doesn't have to be at the moment of crisis. It's hard to become positive in your interactions when it's a crisis-based relationship. So I always recommend that people meet community members when you're simply trying to find out who's out there and what's the work that they're doing. Anyway, I think I've gone on a little too long in terms of the value of pre-contact knowledge in post-contact communities. Anyway, back to you. You can edit that any way you want, Crystal.
Thank you, Gertie, for that. Again, any words that you have to share with people are valued and respected.
Thanks.
So just a little bit about ANCFSAO and BANAC before we carry on. So ANCFSAO, the Association for Native Child and Family Service Agencies of Ontario, is a membership organization that helps our Indigenous child well-being agencies, so our child protection agencies. Some of them offer multi-service, so preventative services all the way through to the interventions when it comes to a child needing a placement or customary care options. Several years ago, as Gertie had alluded to, the government policies were a little bit concerning. Well, they still are, but really concerning in the sense of Indigenous voice. Native voice was not there. Our thoughts, our processes, and our experiences, and how we see the world, it didn't coincide with the policies that were developed to address child welfare. And as Gertie explained, like we had and still do have our roles and responsibilities as Ongwaholi people, as this Anishinaabe people, and we know where we come from. But unfortunately, that clash with the legislation that had been put in place and imposed on us took a detrimental effect. There were many things that occurred, and as a result, the organizations that did exist, they came together and said, we need to unite, and we need to have a strong voice, and we need to bring our collective interests forward. Much like the organization BANAC, where it was also a collection of organizations and First Nations that came together and said, we need to address the social economic conditions of our people, the health and wellness of our people in this area, and we need to do that together. So that's why they came together as well, to bring forth those collective interests. And with that, what we've discovered for both of our organizations that we came from is that they've accomplished a lot of different things, and much like the CANS tool and the cultural addendums, helped push our agenda forward and give our people and our service providers an opportunity to work with our people in a different manner, in a more culturally respectful manner. When we look at the way that we collaborate, that we think about things that have impacted us over the years, the mass removals of children from our communities, we call it cultural genocide. There's multiple reports here in Canada that speak to the evidence before us on what happened to us, what was occurring to our people, and why those things were happening. And it comes down to plain discrimination, the need for accessing the resources within our lands and our communities, and subjecting us to a lower standard of living, feeling that are suggesting that we as Native people were below the social class. And as a result of that, the trauma that Gertie spoke to perpetuated, and the healing that needs to happen takes place over a course of several decades to follow pre-contact. So I'm going to move a little bit into the child and adolescent mental health and the importance of those culturally relevant assessments. So a little bit of context setting again. We as Indigenous people and as organizations, when we came together, one of the biggest things that we saw was that the strengths of our people, the strengths that we have from within, those are so important. And even the gifts of our children and the youth that with it, that they are seen as gifts, but as well the gifts that they bring, the things that they teach us, help us to understand how they're interacting with the world and understand what they need from us to help guide them, to help them feel purpose, help them feel successful, and help them feel value in who they are, and pride in who they are as Ungohui or Anishinaabe people. The cultural knowledge and the practices that we have, we identify them as being protective and resilience factors. And we're going to show you a little bit about that wheel, the medicine wheel, a little bit later on in our presentation, and how it impacts our lives, because it's not simply a linear process for us in our journey to healing or our journey to living. And we go through cycles within our context of living. And then the last piece that I wanted to touch on is that culture can be seen as the solution, not as the problem. And I get that quote from Gertie quite often in many of her speakings. And she talks about the symbolism of our cultures. So myself, I wouldn't have grown up being told you're an Indian or you're First Nations or you're Mohawk. Like that wasn't the way that I was raised. I was raised within my community, within my family system, extended family, multiple families, my mom and her sisters all living under my grandparents' roof. And we had that way of life. My grandfather had a farm as well. And so we all cooperated in a way where it wasn't that we were little workhorses or anything like that, but it was just that we knew what we had to do to put food on the table and to get things done. So I'm going to turn it over to Gertie to talk a little bit about why culture is more symbolic or more important to us to focus on as being solution-based when it comes to working with children, youth, and families in our communities.
Okay, so culture, sometimes people call it our way of life, the way that we live. And so that means that everybody lives within a culture. And that culture is based on the fundamental values of a society, of a population. And because of that, those values are supported by the people who surround you. And in our in our nations, in our societies, that would be an assumption that one should be able to make, and yet we had a rather, I would say, a period of time in which cultural genocide was not just a practice; it was essentially a policy, a government policy. In that, well, in Canada, it was we recognized it as legislation known as the Indian Act, and part of the Indian Act provided for removal of children from their homes and their communities to remove the children to residential schools so that they would not have the influence of their parents in their lives. And the children were generally kept away from their parents for from about the age of 4 or 5 years old until they were 16. And during that time away from their families, they were told all kinds of things. The most devastating piece was that they were told their families, their ancestors, were all wrong. That they had no value system. They had nothing to offer a child to ensure that they would have a good life. And this was, I suppose, in today's way of describing it, that was called brainwashing. And so they dismissed within the child's mind anything good about being Anishinaabe or Ongwehongwe or whatever nation they belonged to, and sought to replace it with with Christian value systems. And the problem was that the way in which those Christian value systems were introduced and pressed on the children was so opposite to what they were, like the way they did it was opposite to the words they were using, and caused a great deal of pain and confusion in the children. And so they were left with very little to go by. They had nothing to hold on to that would suggest to them that life was valuable, that relationships were safe or secure, nor were they left with anything to suggest that their lives had value as well. And that was a system that was in place from about the 1880s to the last school in Canada closed in 1996. And during their incarceration, those children, not one of them that I've ever heard of said it was a good experience. So I have to believe the child because that's who had the experience. So in that, some of those revelations continue to come out in our communities, in our talking circles. And so what does that have to do with culture as a solution, not the problem? What we had were many people who hid their children away. And in hiding their children away, they did so specifically so that they could maintain their language, their creation stories, their way of life, and their value systems. And in doing so, those families hiding their children away meant that they could pass on those teachings to their children, and over the course of those 100 years of devastation, there were families who deliberately held their children away from the mainstream in their own communities, even, so that the priests and the police and the Indian agents didn't have access to them. So when it was once again legal to conduct ceremonies and to speak our language and to tell our stories, we then had people who came forward who quit sitting back and not sharing those things. And I think one of the most important things they did was to remind the people about their relationship with the Creator. When we speak to our children and our communities and our families, we talk about those things that reconnect us to the Creator. And in our communities, in our creation story, it talks about some of the promises that were made in the relationship with the Creator. And so we have the first thing that we have is our names, our spirit names. The second thing that we have is our clan system. The third is our nation and the language that we speak. And the fourth thing that we have is a means by which we make that direct connection back to the Creator. And those four things are, in our understanding, those are the four things that we need in order to be able to do all of the rest of this. That we have a way to reconnect with the Creator, and because of that, we are able to reconnect with each other. That we will know each other by the shared values that we carry, by sometimes being able to say, oh, my clan is such and such. Oh, I have a relative who is also that. My auntie, my grandfather, my grandmother was also part of that clan. Because of the way our clan systems work, we will always find relatives throughout the nation. And we count on that relationship, and we can call on that relationship in order to be able to access information and connection. So all of those things are part of our culture. I think one of the most important elements of our culture is about relationships. That it isn't just human relationships that we're concerned about. We believe as a nation that our relationship is to all of creation. So that means all of the land, everything that grows on it, everything that lives here, all of the water and everything that lives in the water, all of those are part of our culture and our understanding of what's important in life. And the most important, one of the most important things we want to take care of is our responsibility within the relationships that we have. That there is no such thing as just ignoring the needs of the people in our lives. We have responsibilities to each other. But we also have responsibilities for all of those relationships, even with a plant. And tobacco, people think, oh, tobacco is such a, thank you, is such a devastating, has had such a devastating effect on people. But the tobacco in and of itself is a helper for us. It is, it was given as a gift, and it was intended to be used as a means of connecting with the Creator, but also as a means of balancing relationships when we ask somebody to do something for us. The fact that tobacco has been abused, that is a result of choice and free will on the part of human beings. You will never find a bear, an actual bear, who will abuse tobacco or any other part of creation. It takes what it needs and leaves it alone otherwise. We have not learned to do that as human beings. And so when we forget our responsibilities in relationships, it is important for those who do not forget that to remind others about that. And so many times in our work with families and their children, telling the creation story and reminding people that we come from a long, long history of living here in a good way, provides them with a foundation for change, provides them with a way to restore balance in their lives, and to see a path to establish new conditions in their family life. And so to me, culture is probably one of the most influential aspects of working with children and their families. That whether they already knew the story, or maybe they forgot the story for a while, when they return to their own knowledge and understanding of that story, makes a big difference. It makes a big difference because we have now mutual understanding of what we're talking about. And the helper and the one seeking help begin to find a balance in their relationship and are then able to recognize, I think, mutual ground, a place that they can actually meet and see where it takes them, see where they can go with it. And I'm not saying it's an instant fix-all. There's no such thing. It takes a long time for people to come to our attention, being unable to manage the trauma and the pain that they're experiencing. So I know that it takes a long time to heal from that. And so it may not even take just one attempt. Sometimes it takes 10 and 15 and 20. But if they're willing to keep going and trying to do the work, trying to achieve what they need, okay, I'm there. I'll go with you. Anyway, that's how I see culture as being connected to promoting that strength.
Yeah, well, Gertie. The next area that I wanted to kind of connect it all with, and what Gertie just spoke of, was very relevant to the addendums that we created. And we honed in on several key areas as a group collectively on what we felt was important for people to understand when you're starting to work with children, youth, and families, needing to understand their histories as well as their understanding of their histories. And it's through the conversation that you begin to start to build those relationships, understanding where they're at with their cultural identity, their understanding of language. And we don't mean language by do you know how to speak the language, but do you understand the words that are being spoken? Because our First Nations language is actually action oriented. It's not a singular understanding a word, but it actually means and has multiple meanings. And I'll even take my name, for example, Gotehanis. And my name Gotehanis is an action word. It means she's walking on, but it also means she's carrying on, she's strutting, or she's walking with purpose. So those types of things have many different types of meanings for words. And so all of our language has a different meaning. And so the disconnect between the non-natives and the native people is through translation. Many things have been lost through translation when you're wondering, okay, well, what do you call this place? Well, what do you mean? Our village? Well, our village is Ganata. Oh, what? It's Canada. Okay, like this is Canada. We're like, yeah. And trying to use our language to say like yeah or no, like you're saying it wrong. But anyways, Ganata is our village. And so our village is all the Northern Territory here. Huge village we have. The other area is that connection to land, and Gertie spoke of that again about it's not just connecting to the land by way of this is where I come from or this is where I am, but that spiritual realm of understanding our Mother Earth and what she is to provide for us. What grows from Mother Earth, like we showed tobacco as being one of those medicines that we utilize. But you also look at this vision of the trees and how huge those trees are, the roots that are dug right deep down. And even sometimes we even say you need to ground yourself. You're having a hard day. You're lost. And hug a tree. Like that's like where does that come from? But it's really about the pulse of that tree, the energy that tree has, the living entity, the spirit within the tree, that connection. Walking around in our moccasins, and many people see our moccasins. Well, why do we have moccasins? And you think about the connection of the animal that those moccasins have and the spirit of the animal, and we carry that spirit with us. Some of us we poke holes in the bottom of our moccasin for the babies to help release some of that spiritual energy, but as well that closeness that we feel when we're walking on Mother Earth, to be able to stay grounded and stay connected. So really understanding what does that mean, which kind of leads into cultural connections. And Gertie explained like the connections to our stories, and we wouldn't have these stories had those ancestors of ours not hidden their children and not protected them and not kept them away from that outside interference and influence. And then the special gifts, when we think about special gifts, we think about it from a manner of some people call them deficits. They call them disabilities, that a child is born with a disability. And we're thinking, well, no, the child has a gift that is she or he is here to teach us. And what is it that they're teaching us? They're teaching us patience, love, compassion, respect, all of those things to hold the child and whatever it is that they have that we're not accustomed to be able to give us the experience to live out those values that have been set forth. And the life purpose, Gertie explained as she explained why people share the creation stories. It helps give that youth, that child, that sense of life purpose. And if they understand their creation story, that's a good way to connect back and relate to say, okay, let's focus on this area. So the area, for example, of the turtle having to fulfill its duty and give up what its freedom of traveling all over the place to stay complacent, to stay in a spot. And it was on a consensus basis. Okay, I have to do this in order for Sky Woman to survive in this area. So things like that. family healing recovery process, and Gertie spoke to it as well, is we're all on a healing journey. Even though we might not say I'm healing or I'm communicating, we have to heal from the impacts of the past, of contact, of the doctrine of discovery, of being displaced from our communities, of roaming from the lands that we previously had, and our riches, I would say, is the hunting grounds and the fishing that we were able to do to provide that. We're all recovering from that. And then how our parents raised us. Our parents raised us the best way they knew how, because that's how their parents raised them the best way they knew how. And all of that, again, Western interference or cultural disruption resulted in a lot of trauma, a lot of loss. But what do we have as well? We have our humor, and we were gifted that opportunity to laugh and make jokes. And Gertie did make a little joke to you all, so I don't know if you got it, but for some of us, like, that's just the way it's making light of situations. Like, what can you do? Do you harp on it? Do you become angry, or do you use your humor in a way to help break the ice and to help relate to one another? And our extended families are so huge that if we know our family, that's quite a strength. But if we don't know our family, how do we get to that place where we are reconnecting people, building on that family system? Whether families does well together when they're all congregated, or whether they're not doing so well. Like, we have our family systems, and we at the end of the day, tragedy strikes. Where do we go? We run to our family. And then our access to our cultural helpers, and Gertie talked about the medicine. The tobacco is one of those cultural helpers. So cultural helper doesn't have to actually physically mean a person. So when we think about that, and looking at these types of strengths from those perspectives, and the dialogue that needs to happen, that you might not get the answers in one conversation, but it's through relationship building that we begin to understand, where's that child, where's that family at. And then we also, through those dialogues, start to look at their needs. And what is it that's, again, we didn't focus so much on what are they missing, but through those conversations, we get their story. What their experiences were with racism. What are the conditions of their family system? Are they able to provide in a way that they have those skills to hunt? They have those skills to fish, that they have the skills to store dry foods, things like that, for in times of hardship? And are they able to do those basic things of life, as well as their understanding of their legacy of the residential school, and whether or not they understand how it impacts them? Child welfare involvement is huge, because if it wasn't the residential schools, it was the child welfare involvement who again, were in mass removals. There was a particular notion that came. It was called the 60 scoop. Now people call it the millennium scoop. But here in Canada, there's a rights tribunal order which states that Canada discriminated against First Nations people, and as a result, still going through the processes of the undoing the harms that were done and righting the wrongs. And then suicide is that last area when we think about how high the rates of suicide are with our families, our children. And how do we help build that value of life for somebody? Like, where we help them get to a place where they see that their life is valuable, that they are here for a purpose, that children are gifts. And I'm still a child. Like, I am the gift. So how do I make sure that whoever we are encountering with, that they understand that value of life? And so that brings us to coming to a close almost with the integrated service approach and the medicine wheel. So Gertie's just going to explain a little bit about how the connections are with the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, that interconnection piece for you to just get an idea. I know the visual looks a little bit busy, but that's just because we wanted to give as much information as possible to you on the different areas that you come in and out of it. And as I explained earlier, we are not linear. We don't come A to Z, like we come in, we come out. Gertie.
Yes. Okay, so this is I suppose the best description of this, or perhaps title for this medicine wheel, the way it's laid out here, is to describe it as the complete human being and human experience. That in each of us, we come into this life complete. We are physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual beings, and we seek to live a life, and the way that we do that is to develop our knowledge, our skills, our attitudes, and our values. And as we develop those, we begin to see that we need to have a purpose, and so we seek out a vision, and we recognize our responsibilities within our relationships, and to share knowledge and reason things out with those around us, and that we don't do anything all by ourselves. That was much more easily shown in the old days, when we would never go alone to go hunting or gathering. We would always go with our contemporaries, men of the same age or women of the same age, or sometimes multi-generational groups of women and children would work together to gather berries and the fruits of the earth. And men would work together to go hunting. They would never go by themselves, simply because it was more likely to have a good result if you hunted with your friends. So all of these actions that we take, we reason these things out, and we know, based on our understanding of other people's capacities and abilities, who does what. And there wasn't a sense of the need to go it alone. As a matter of fact, going it alone or being all by yourself was so unusual as to be the part of a spiritual journey of vision questing, or if that's a positive reason for being alone. But it also, in a vision time, when you were out alone, seeking meaning and purpose for your life, sitting alone reminded you about how much you need other people, how much you need those connections, how important it was to have those good relationships, and how important it was to have those connections with the people around you. So you paid attention to all of that, all of the relationships that you had in your life, because you were sitting alone. In our traditional societies, hundreds of years ago, one of the most devastating results of inability to get along with others was that you would be banished from your community. And in that banishment, the people didn't see you anymore. And that was the worst form of punishment that you could be given. People who were banished from their communities were no longer spoken to, no longer addressed, no longer included, no longer asked to be part of. And even if they asked to come, nobody would answer them. And that devastation would be so deep that they would leave their community. And even as they would struggle to survive on their own, what they would realize very quickly is that they couldn't just go somewhere else and start somewhere else again. It took a long time to get into that state of being banished. And And in some ways, for some people, there was no return from that. So, those who think that we don't know how to apply a gradual form of discipline, that was the extreme. That very rarely happened in our societies, but it was possible. And so we didn't lock people up because we had no jails. But being locked out was even more devastating, I believe. But anyway, I go on too long about that. The notion about what is it that makes a good life? Every advisor and teacher I've had over the years has made it very clear that we were promised a good life. We were not promised an easy life. We knew that we would have to work hard and work together, and sometimes work with people who were not necessarily our best friends, but we would always see them as a relative or a person who comes to us from the Creator, and that made them our relation. And so when we would say Nikonagina, what we were saying was that we were all related to everything in creation, and so we called on all our relatives to help us. Nikonis is probably the most important aspect of what makes a life journey successful, because it takes in all of our relationships and our responsibilities throughout our lives. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So as Gertie spoke, I switched slides because she was actually making that connection, connecting that spirit to the journey. And by doing that, you're able to look at things from a different perspective. When it comes to bringing a child, a youth, or a family to that place where they understand who they are, where they come from, they're in connection with their culture in a way that their relationships began to form differently. So when you are working with our Indigenous people, with our First Nations people, with the Native people, you need to have a good understanding of who they are, where they come from. You need to not make assumptions and say, well, hey, I met somebody who was Mohawk, and I know this is what she talked about, or I met somebody who was Ojibwe, and this is what she said happens. That people have their own tools, their own medicine wheels, their own cultures, and you need to experience it from the community. You build relationships slowly, and you do that through conversations, through visiting, lots of visiting that happens. And sometimes that's all it needs to be, is a visit. When you're hearing and you're listening and you're paying attention to what is being said. And when a person feels valued, they feel that you have been listening to them and you're not just coming in with the assumption that you're the great power that's going to help rescue or save them, but that you're meeting them where they're at that place. And that's why the integrated approach, the inviting the services that you've met, that you now understand what they provide, that you invite the people together to come and collaborate with the family, with the child, on how it is that we can best work and help meet whatever it is that you're striving to meet. So with that, I'd like to say Nyawa Goa, for this opportunity to come and speak to you today. Again, as I spoke in the morning, our prior to our conversation, was that contact information on this slide will get you to myself or Gertie. So if you go on our website, click on the info link, you can send a message saying, hey, we need to get in touch with Gertie or Crystal, or can Crystal get in touch with Gertie for us? And we'll be able to do that through here as well. Dr. John Lyons also has our contact information, as well as Diamond there.
Gertie, any last words before we part our ways?
Yes. I just want to say thank you to John for inviting us to be part of your gathering today. We've been trying to find a way to connect over the last few years. And for me, this is a good way of doing things because I can't necessarily travel away as much as I used to. The work that we do in our territories quite often follows the same sort of pattern as the sort of the seasonal pattern that developed over time with conferences and workshops and all the rest of it. So I really hope that people take the time to meet the service providers or the community members that are doing their work in their territories and begin to see what alliances and partnerships you can create for the sake of the families that turn to you for help. So that's my very long-winded miigwech, and thank you for being part of the session this morning.